Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we'll be looking at part 2 of the Multi-Cloud You're Doing It Wrong series. Now in this video today we're going to have a look, very high level, over a solution that meets all those capabilities and requirements that we talked about in part 1, which enable your organization to successfully manage and govern and operate a multi-cloud environment. Now, for those familiar with my channel can probably guess what it's going to be. For those that not, we'll be looking today at the ARIA suite. Now, specifically, we'll be focusing on ARIA automation, but the ARIA suite is really one of those things where the sum is greater than all the parts, because as you add different capabilities or integrate the products, more and more features get enabled and they compound in the value that they bring. Now, what we're going to do is really just be scratching the surface. I'm probably going to miss some things, as I like only doing videos in one take, but we'll go through in the same order that we covered the previous capabilities. And first and foremost is the cost optimization. So let's get into that. Now, how can we efficiently cost and govern the life cycle of all your resources, as well as making intelligent endpoint decisions for your organizations? And what I mean by that is that while the end users need technical requirements, they need, amount of resources, amount of IOPS, amount of bandwidth, amount of GPU, memory, CPU, whatever it might be, or service like database as a service or load balancer or firewall or whatever it is. The business also has the requirements of being able to put it in the appropriate place from security, the appropriate place for costings, the appropriate place for location for the end consumers. There's a whole bunch of different things. So by being able to have the business make the intelligent decision on where the resource is placed based on a combination of the technical requirements and the business policies, ends up saving the organization a ton of money. Now, first off, let's just cover the placement. So when we create endpoints, which you can add pretty much any endpoint to ARIA automation, is that we can go in and add any cloud account, right? That's native cloud as well as the vSphere cloud endpoints. And then when we got that, we've got these high-level capability tags. As you can see, Platform AWS is a very basic one. Region Sydney is another one, right? And then you dive and you carve that up even further. So you start going, down to the cloud zones, which think about them as resource groups sort of thing, but allows you to break these up even further. You can go in, we can see that we've got different ones, region A and Z there. We've got compute, you can start seeing dev environment, region Sydney, and these can go down to, GPU enabled, maybe specific CPU types of performance, disk performance, all those sort of things, network bandwidths, whatnot. Right, the same thing for Kubernetes zones, the same thing for image mappings, the same thing for network profiles. As you go in and start defining all these endpoints that you want to consume or allowed self-service consumption to, is you get the ability to now mark what those capabilities are. So if we even dive down into the actual networks, you can see function database, function management, they could be subnets, it doesn't matter what it is at the end of the day. Same with storage profiles, great. So once they're all together, you can then enforce those placements based on the capabilities that are put in the deployments. So you can force them through actual projects. So when you configure a project and you set up those guardrails, you can actually say where a particular project can or cannot provision. You can even tag them appropriately. So you don't even need to worry about them tagging resources appropriately. You'll actually tag it with the cost center that you want, the owners, whatever you want to tag it with, so that you can then generate reports and that, so you can see what each project is costing and stuff like that. You can say which projects, what networks they can and can't use, what storage profiles, what extensibility can they connect to, can they connect to Ansible or not, can they connect to Puppet or not, can they connect to Salt or not, it doesn't really matter. You can just choose what projects are allowed to access, right? And then also set up memory limits, CPU limits, instances, all the rest of it, right? And then we can have a look at the price. So from a project point of view, we can actually see the price. I can go into this particular deployment here, which is just a single AWS machine. I can look at the price and it will actually show me the monthly, weekly, daily breakdown of this particular deployment. Now this one's not too crash hot, so let's actually go back to an actual deployment screen, infrastructure screens. We'll go back to projects. And from an admin point of view, with obviously there's reporting and dashboarding and other things in ARIA operations and whatnot, but this gives me a brief overview of the current cost to date in the month of all these different deployments. So we can actually have a look at, say, this instance here. We can have a look at the price. We can see what's being charged in that price. Let's look at something like this. We can then see the breakdown of that, the weekly, monthly, daily costs of these particular machines. And then we can also dive into the details, like what is costing me this much money, right? So it gives you that centralized ability. Now this is taking in data from the cloud health for public cloud, ARIA operations for vSphere clouds, and bringing in that cost data, right? But if you didn't want to use that cost data that's available to you, you can also create your own price cards. So you can come into here, you can create your price cards. Let's just have a quick look here. Won't change anything. But if we have a factor, so basically all this is doing is bringing in those costs from those third-party, no, I won't say third-party, first-party tools, bringing those costs from the other tools in the suite, being public cloud and private cloud costs, and giving a factor of 1. So I was just going to pass it through one for one. So we could do, 1.2, right? And that's actually going to then put a 20% increase on that cost, reading back to the end users if you want, right? So you can actually start driving costs and not just have a show back, but a charge back as well. Or you can go in here and you can just change it to what you want. You can work out, do the numbers yourself. You can charge it hourly, daily, weekly, monthly, whether you always want it to be charged, only when it's powered on. Do you want it to be charged? Do you want it powered on at least once? Then you can go into guest OSs, so you can start adding Windows, Linux, Red Hat, whatever it might be, apply the licensing costs that are needed there, so then there's a real cost there that comes through. You can have tags, so if I tag the machine for backup purposes, then I'm going to charge for that backup. Again, as a hourly, daily, weekly, monthly, one-off, always, all those sort of things you get to choose. Custom properties, I generally don't add anything in there, but you can add. They're the same as tags, but they're specifically related for the ARIA suite of tools. Then you can do overall charges, so you can do one-time, recurring, whatever you want. So you can actually come up with your own pricing cards for your own organization on how you consume all this stuff, right? So now we'll move on to the policies around costing. So one of the really, really cool things, and something that gets overlooked a lot around the importance, is something like lease times. So when I do a deployment, how long do I want that around for? Maybe if it's in a dev environment, maybe a week, 5 days, maybe 10 days, I don't know, 14 days, 2 weeks. I seem to be 2 weeks, the 14-day mark, 15-day mark seems to be about normal. But if we go in and have a look at the definitions, we can then create a new policy around leases, as an example. So you can put maximum lease times. Grace period is so when it expires its lease, it shuts down and it stays there for 5 days before it gets deleted. So you can make sure that you don't lose any data or anything important, just in case someone missed the gazillion emails and being off for a week before it's actually deleted, right? So, and then moving forward is that you've also got, other policies around resource quotas and approval policies. So if someone's approving something that is going to cost a lot of money, then you can go through an approval policy, right? So there's all these built-in governance that actually control the life cycle and management of all the resources from the time they're created right through to the time they're deleted as well, right? That includes the day 2 tasks. I want to add disk, I want to scale out, I want to grow the disk size, I want to add CPU memory, whatever. Like you can do all sorts of things, right? So it's just about how do I control and govern the cost and the placement around all of that. Cool. So that probably took a little bit longer than I imagined. But let's move on. Next up is innovation and value. How can we exploit the most out of new technologies, test new technologies, as well as get the most value out of your commercial arrangements that you have with vendors? So There's a little bit of overlap here with the portability of ICT section, but it's sort of a byproduct of that. So apologies for the overlap here. This is the ability to not be locked in to an end provider of your resources. So, whether it's a hyperscaler, whether it's a sovereign cloud, whether it's someone, a vSphere endpoint or any of the hyperscalers basically, allow you to be able to pivot in times of need. So maybe their data center goes down, maybe there's legal disputes, commercial disputes, maybe there's a security issue. It could be anything, right? But what it allows you to do is be able to keep those vendors and providers honest with very, very sharp pencils, because you're not locked in. When you can, and we'll go over to here, when you can create code, infrastructure as code, once and deploy anywhere, it allows you to pivot very, very quickly. So I had a customer who had about 1,000 workloads in Azure, and a couple of thousand in AWS. Anyway, there was a commercial breakdown. There was an issue on their side, and they actually turned off, being able to turn off that endpoint. So when we talked about before about intelligent placement, they actually removed it out of the equation completely. The end users didn't even need to know, they didn't even need to care, which is the great thing, right? So that the business did that at their level, and then meaning that wherever the decisions went, it wouldn't choose that endpoint. And then they actually decommissioned all the workloads that were in there, because when everything's blueprinted and everything is code, you can easily redeploy. And then they redeployed it into a competitor cloud, and were able to, and basically that was within a day period. So it wasn't weeks, it wasn't months, it wasn't years. It was literally redeploying 1,000 workloads within a 24-hour period, and had their services back up and running. And you can imagine, the pencil sharpener came out, they came in, they fixed their issues, the customer ended up being better off, and they got the most value out of their vendor because they could do this, right? And even if, while I'm talking about cloud agnostic capabilities here, so machine, load balancer, network, security group, volume, and I'll even include Kubernetes in that as well, you can actually still use cloud specific stuff. So for instance, I could have this particular app here, and I'm not going to actually do anything because I'll wreck this demo app, but you could go, okay, I want to move over the DB instance. You can then put over an Azure one as well, right? So you could Azure database, and then you could have the logic in your code to be able to say, if I go to AWS, use RDS for instance. If I go to Azure, use SQLDB, and then at the end of the day, as long as I've got using the same type of database, obviously, then it will choose and actually be intelligent. So I still don't need to change my code no matter which endpoint it goes into, just as an example, right? Now, what about if all these out-of-the-box capabilities here, there was some new service that was dropped by AWS or Azure or something like that? How do we support that? Well, simple. You can use a point solution like Terraform. So you could drag a Terraform object out here. You can it runs Terraform natively within the ARIA automation, and it can execute and consume whatever their provider is. So that's if they've updated their provider for that particular endpoint, you can start consuming it, right? There's also Ansible capability to drag and drop over there, Puppet capability if that's what you have as well. But it enables that out-of-the-box extending capability to be able to consume other resources, but then bring them into that governance, right? Being able to have those life cycles, be able to have those lease times, be able to have the approval policies and everything else that is very important to make sure that you keep costs, that you control and govern all those clouds from a central policy point of view. And then it also has the ability to have extensibility. So I can actually extend out with functions as a service. I can create my actions. They could be in PowerShell, they can be in Python, they can be in Node.js, and if I choose it to, it can be basically round robin and intelligently place again, but you can actually specifically target endpoints. But you could say, I want this one to run in Lambda, I want this one to run in Azure Functions, I want this one to run on-prem, but you start offering up these functions as a service. So it allows you to be able to, again, adhere to that services business model and services orientated operations to be able to offer up extensible capabilities and bring them into the governance fold as well, using completely custom, right? Now, yes, you have to write these, and yes, you have to maintain these, but you don't have to maintain the governance or the logic behind it, which is really important. Next thing is the portability and standardization. So how can we standardize security, code, reusability of resources, and make a contestable ICT vendor environment? And we've talked about that previously with that overlap. So, code something once, deploy anywhere. But at the end of the day, because this is all project driven, or projects are a logical construct within this, but because everything's as a project means that you can actually, like I mentioned in the first part, is you can plug in those vendors. So you can go to market, you can get a vendor to create an app or a service or a capability that you want for your organization. They can win the tender and everything else. But when they come in, you plug them into this, meaning that you've set up the guardrails around how they can operate, where they can operate, and what they can do. Meaning that there's no shenanigans happening under the covers there. Everything is above board around security and what they're using and consuming, and they can just go ahead and create their services with that full visibility to the organization, right? Which is something that all organizations want. Now, what it also allows is if there happens to be commercial breakdowns or something goes wrong, they can cut them loose, right? And at the same time, if everything's good, they can keep them on and they can iterate that service and keep paying them to look after it, right? But it's still within the governance of this platform. And obviously the portability, being able to have one single entry point to all cloud endpoints, simplifies your security configurations across the board, allows you to do consistent security groups, firewall management, networking, and everything across every single cloud endpoint, which is really, really cool, right? It's something that everyone wants to do, as well as being able to support those different endpoints like from an end user point of view, like they're all the same. And what I mean by that, let's actually jump into here. I'm gonna jump into my resources here. So I deployed these not too long ago. I don't think I've deleted them. Oh, not resources, let's go deployments. Deployments. And I've got an AWS and Azure one, right? I'm not gonna vSphere. You just gotta trust me, VMware product supporting vSphere. It should work, right? So let's just go AWS here. I can actually have a look, go into this one. I can look at a load balancer, right? I want to add a route, day 2. Oh crap, I forgot, I need to add it. I can go into here, I can reconfigure, all right? I can then add the new route, put all the different data that I need in there, hit submit, and it can go through an approval policy if it needs to, but essentially hit submit, go off, and it will change any changes that I've added in there. And not just that, when you go to manage these machines, we can then add disk, delete, power off, reset, reboot, resize, update, scale out, scale in if it's a cluster. You've got all these capabilities that will be up here. We can then edit deployment, we can change owner, we can change lease, we can update the whole thing by adding an additional node to scale out, those sort of things. So it gives you this common capability, or this day 2 management of all your resources. Now, if I go to the Azure one, which this is AWS, so we can see it's an AWS capability, we can go back here and we go to Azure, is that all of a sudden I go to an Azure load balancer, I can then reconfigure and it looks the same. I've got the same user experience when I need to reconfigure an Azure one, and obviously the same with vSphere ones with the NSX load balancers. And same with the machines, right? We can click on the machines, we can, snapshot, add disk, resize, scale in, scale out, suspended, update tags, we can scale these out. So it gives us the same consistent capability across all the resources, across all the cloud endpoints, which really brings in that standardization around to operate, around the policies, around the consumption of it, the end user experience of it, and having that code once, deploy anywhere allows you to be able to pivot, change providers, as well as plug in those ICT vendors that you get in to do something, right? Very, very cool. And then this moves us to that whole as a service. So you can remember in part 1 down the right hand side, it was basically changing your business to be a services oriented business, everything as a service. or business as a service. Now, being able to do that is you go through the service, this supports that. It has its own catalog capability. I've got the service broker here, and I had it up before. You could see the catalog. Now this can be anything, and this is also sort of extends into how can I use new emerging tech, which I didn't cover, and it's only just come to me. But when I go and add different content, I can actually choose different content sources. So I can use AWS CloudFormation templates, right? So I use AWS's native infrastructure as code capability, service that straight up, have smart custom drop-down forms, govern it with the same policies and approvals and everything else that's in it, lease times, all those sort of things. I can have my extensibility actions, so this is functions as a service, so I can surface up any script to execute, basically any function that I want to have there. I can have orchestrator, which you can do pretty much anything in orchestrator as well, but you can also put pipelines, you can put your templates, and we've already covered all the things that you can do in templates, and you can actually connect other automation things, right? So you can start adding all these content sources for consumption in your organization. So I've actually even had AD group creation done, right? Manager comes in, new starter, I've got a new starter, I want to copy this person, and actually had all that within these sort of forms. So you can go to that sort of level, right? And then we move into the policies. So this is, we looked a little about the lease policies before, but we can put day 2 action policies. So who do we, if you do make a deployment into production, who can and can't delete it, who can and can't restart it, who can and can't scale it out. Is it going to be a service account and done automated, right? With the data coming in from ARIA operations for apps or ARIA operations, right? Are we, we want to go through approval policies. So if you're going over budget, or if you're if you want a particularly large set of resources and it's above what you've got, go through an approval policy, right? Do you want to share your content? So this is where you onboard a ICT provider, they want to share something they've created for consumption, they can share that content with people. So you can start adding all these things in here and actually operate your business and the consumption of your multi-clouds as a service. Right, very, very cool. And with that obviously comes, cultural changes and everything else there to be able to enable the best out of all those things. Now, look, I've only really scratched the surface. Check out my other videos in my channel if you want to deep dive a bit further into these. Very, very cool stuff. I'll be having a lot more videos coming out around about securing your multi-clouds. That'll probably be part 3 of multi-cloud, you're doing it wrong. I originally was going to do 2 parts, but I'm thinking I'm going to do 3 now. But anyway, we'll see how it goes. Hope you enjoyed. Hope you got some information out of this so you can go away and see how you can consume multi-cloud. Hope you're rethinking around how do I manage this, right? How do I make it easier for myself? Because naturally, if you're in IT, we're all lazy. We all want to automate most of our work. And if we can do that easily, the better. So anyway, hope you enjoyed. Stay safe out there. See you, bye.